Oh, it's a great day on the State of the Nation when you get one of your favorite guests into the studio, and there is no guest that we enjoy getting into the studio as much as Dawie Roodt, who is going to give us some insights into the economy. But before we get into the discussion, I want to give a big support message to Pace Car Rental that sponsor us and help to keep us on the air. And they help you to get a cheaper car rental. So go to the Pace website, use our code SONA, S-O-N-A, and you will get a discount off your next car hire. And as I say, don't be a mug, use Pace Car Rental. They help us, so you too would be supporting the State of the Nation. So, as I mentioned at the start, joining us today, the CEO of the Efficient Group, the one and only Dawie Roodt. Dawie, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Mike. Not the CEO, but I'm the chief economist there. Last time I looked.
Yeah, well, I've just promoted you.
Thank you.
When you get back, just tell them.
Thank you very much.
Dawie, let's talk about our economy, because there's been some semblance of better news after many years of us getting used to really bad news. And you want to focus specifically on inflation, inflation targeting, and the importance of all of this. Explain to the people watching us.
Yeah, well, there are three requirements to get I believe, the magic ingredients to get an economy to grow. There are three things that you need to do. You must protect private property rights. And I mean a very broad definition of private property rights. We've spoken about this before. Secondly, you must protect and encourage free trade, because free trade basically is a free lunch. And we've spoken about that as well. And the third thing is you must provide sound money. Or put differently, you must operate in a low inflation environment. Now, the first two, the ANC's government is going out of their way to undermine the protection of private property rights and free trade. And we can talk about that. But what has happened recently, we're kind of getting a grip on sound money. And we must thank the South African Reserve Bank. Lesetja Kganyago has been doing an absolutely brilliant job in getting inflation lower, and very importantly, getting inflation expectations lower as well. So why is, maybe we should just touch on that. We know inflation is a bad thing because it erodes buying power. It's especially bad for people that live on a fixed salary or on interest or whatever the case may be. And inflation has got all sort of other bad things because of inflation. But it's one major thing that inflation causes to the economy that will always lead to weak economic growth in a high inflation environment, and that it distorts the price signals that you get from the economy. Remember, prices going up and down is good. It tells us what's going on in the economy. But when all prices just keep on going up, you can't see the signals, you cannot allocate resources properly, and your economy will suffer because of that. And the Lesetja Kganyago recently kept on pushing inflation lower and lower by lowering the inflation target essentially to 4.5% initially, and then to 3%. And there was this bit of a spat between him and the Minister of Finance, and maybe we should talk about that as well. And eventually the Minister of Finance, he said, okay, let's target 3%, and that's what we have at the moment. In the meantime, inflation expectations have been coming down as well, and that is the second very important goal of the Reserve Bank. So there are two things that they do. They manage inflation mechanically by changing interest rates, increasing money, the price of money, for example, taking demand out of the economy. And the other one is through open mouth policy. Keep on talking about inflation, keep on talking about importance of getting that down. And that, and you can measure that by looking at inflation expectations. And that has been coming down as well. So the Reserve Bank did an absolutely amazing job. And it is our responsibility as South Africans to make sure we do not accept price increases. You only accept a price increase if that goes with an increase in productivity, for example. Maybe just a point. Why was the Minister of Finance so reluctant? Why was he only reducing the inflation target, kicking and screaming? And the reason why is because politicians like high inflation. Inflation allows you to hide all sort of other bad things. It allows you to hide the fact that you're highly unproductive. And that is exactly what the state is. So that even the Minister of Finance, he penciled in increases in state expenditure of 4.5% over the next couple of years. Now the Minister of Finance, he must cut back on his own state expenditure because the official target is 3%. The same goes to Eskom. We've just seen that they demand the trade unions a 15% increase. That is totally and completely unacceptable. Eskom is also wrong, offering them a 3.5%. They cannot give them a 3.5% increase unless there's an increase in productivity. And I promise you, there was no increase or very little increase in productivity when you talk about labor productivity. And in fact, labor at Eskom is far too expensive. We have to reduce the price of labor for at Eskom. But the point is, so the spotlight from now on is going to be a big, bright spotlight on all those underperformers, like the local authorities, like Eskom, like Transnet, and also like the Minister of Finance. So that's one benefit of low inflation. But it's another very important benefit. Remember, inflation erodes the value of money, and it also erodes the value of debt. But if it erodes the value of money, that means over time, if your inflation rate is higher than that of the Americans, as an example, which has been the case for decades in South Africa, usually. Recently, that changed a little bit. But if your inflation rate is high, it means your currency will become less valuable than the currency of a country with a lower inflation rate. That also means that your currency will be more volatile. And if you have a more volatile currency, or the exchange rate is more volatile, it means that's additional risk in the system. So foreigners wanting to invest in South Africa now ask a couple of questions. Am I going to get a good return? Is this a nice liquid market, for example? But they're also going to ask the question, will I run a currency risk? And with inflation lower, chances of a much more volatile currency exchange rate is reduced as well, creating a more friendly environment, an easier environment, an environment that's much more attractive for foreign investors as well. And that's another contributing reason why we saw the financial markets doing very well recently. So the lowering of inflation targets, people don't talk about it, they don't discuss it around the inflation, or rather around the Bryfleis fires, because they don't understand it. But it's crucial. It's a major thing. It's probably the best economic news that came out of South Africa for a very, very, very long time.
And Dawie, you talk about that price stability in that the currency stays stable, the inflation, interest rates becomes stable. That's all the ingredients that happened in the 2000s when we were having economic growth, isn't it?
Exactly. That happened when we first introduced inflation targets. We had it was a but subsequently what happened, we were supposed to reduce the inflation target band just after 2000 or the years thereafter. We did not. Because, like I've said, inflation provides the opportunity to politicians and ineptocrats and bureaucrats to hide behind inflation and try to hide their incompetence, their unproductivity, and that stuff like that. But where we are now is exactly that. So this could be the beginning of much better things for the South African economy.
Because certainly from almost, if you want to call it the political side of it, it was night and day between the debacle of budget, the main budget, and all of the problems that we had around the VAT increase and the intransigence, I suppose, of the finance minister to even look at expenditure. And all he wanted to do was increase income, and the only way he could do it was to press the VAT button. And they declared war on Lesetjo Kganyago, the governor of the Reserve Bank. Now suddenly, it seems like people got around a table, discussed these things, and the minister accepted, in actual fact, he was the guy talking about inflation targeting being lower.
Yes, exactly. And but there are some other things as well that I think is very important now. So low inflation targets will put the spotlight on the underperformers, like Eskom is a good one. But low inflation will also put a spotlight on our political leaders. And that's exactly the point you're making now. Looking at the beginning of the year, what happened in budget 1, 2, and eventually 3, it is very clear to me that the quality of and this is right across the board, the quality of our political leaders in South Africa is really horrible. We've got bad, all the political parties. There are one or two exceptions perhaps here and there. But as a rule, the quality of South African politicians is really substandard. But now with a low inflation environment, you can't hide anymore. You can run, but you can't hide anymore.
And you mentioned that you needed the three things, and we've discussed inflation. The property rights that we need, we'll discuss, and then of course the free trade, or the because obviously one of the arguments about our economy is that, okay, let's first deal with the property rights. It feels to me that the government is looking for an off-ramp to the property rights, that problem that they've created.
Yeah, maybe just
Yes.
a little bit of background. Why is it important to protect private property rights? There's a saying: "There's no free lunch," but there is indeed a free lunch,
Right.
and that free lunch is free trade. Because if you and I exchange something between us, then I will gain from the transaction and you will gain from the transaction. Because if we don't both gain from a transaction, then we won't do that. So that means after the transaction, you and I are always better off. And that's a free lunch. Just think about this for a moment. Before a transaction and after the transaction, nothing changed except that ownership exchanged from you to me, for example. And we're both better off, and we've created a free lunch out of nothing. But we can only trade if we're the owner of whatever it is that we are trading. And that's why the protection of private property rights is so important. And when I talk about private property rights, I mean a very, very broad definition. It's not only my property, my physical property, but it's my right on freedom of movement, or my right on my life. It's my property. It must be protected. That's the primary function of the state, is to look after me.
Yeah.
I'm the most important person. And then, of course, create an environment to allow me to trade my stuff with one another. And you're absolutely right. What has happened with this expropriation nonsense of the state, but that's not only the legislation. It's everything that goes with that. It's a whole setup. It's a whole ideology of the ANC. They think, coming back to VAT again, or tax increases, that everything belongs to the state. It does not. It belongs to the people of South Africa. They can't just increase taxes and keep on spending more money. It's my money. It is my taxes. And I only give it my money to the state if the state does what they're supposed to be doing, and that's to protect me. But you're right. I think what we are seeing is that the ANC realizes, and there's a lot of political pressure on them. They're losing a lot of support, which is another wonderful thing that is happening in South Africa. The ANC realizes that you have to protect private property rights, that you're running this country into the ground, and with that you also have to create an environment that is conducive to trade, basically. So I see some green shoots. Also, and one or two things that I think we need to mention, don't give some credit where it's due. The Minister of Finance has been doing not too bad a job. I don't want to give him too much credit. But running a primary fiscal surplus is really important. And maybe we can just talk about that a little bit. But the fiscal surplus, essentially what it means, if we take interest out of the equation, then we have a fiscal surplus. It's called a primary surplus. And if we put interest back again, then of course we still have a deficit, and debt keeps on going up. So we need to reduce the fiscal deficit a little bit more. But essentially what happens, that interest component mostly goes to the institutional investors like pension funds and the savings industry and so on. So if we exclude interest payment, then we are running a fiscal surplus. And interest payments is less stimulatory than normal expenditure on, say, for example, salaries. And that is why running a fiscal primary surplus is so important, and we are there. We've been there for 3 years or so now. And that's another contributing reason why the equity markets are doing well, and especially the bond market is doing well as well. So a couple of things are starting to get pretty well aligned.
And it's no different to the individual who's got a big credit card debt. You start paying down your credit card debt. You then can spend less money on the interest payments and the repayments, and more money on fixing your house, that gutter that should have been fixed.
Let me just make another point about the fiscal deficit. If you ask analysts, especially on the left of the political spectrum, they will tell you that we have an austere budget, which is not the case. And the reason why I say that is because we're running a deficit. As long as you're running a deficit, as long as your debt keeps on going up, you've got an expansionary fiscal deficit. But when you run a primary fiscal surplus, in other words, take the interest component out, then it's less expansionary. So even on the side of the fiscal accounts, it's becoming less expansionary. And that will also have a positive impact on inflation. So if you spend money on salaries, that money goes directly into the economy. But if you spend money on interest, eventually it will go into the economy, but first it goes to a pension fund and it will be spent later, for example. So running a primary surplus is actually very, very good news for South Africa. And this is the third year in a row that we'll be running a fiscal surplus.
Yeah, but we still, where we do have a problem is in economic growth. And what do you say to the people that say, well, look, it's all fine to get the accounts in order, but we've got a massive unemployment?
We don't have the accounts in order.
Well,
we're making some progress. Yeah, we're making some progress. There's a long way still to go. The debt levels will keep on going up. We need to spend less money. We need to cut back on other things, current expenditure, salaries especially. The civil servants, we've spoken about this so many times, are mostly overpaid and mostly underworked in South Africa. But there, like I've said, there are some signs that things are getting a little bit better. Low inflation environment, low inflation targets will make it more difficult now for the civil servants to demand these ridiculous increases. But the problem really is still that we have a very highly inefficient state. The local authorities are horribly managed. Look at what's happening in Joburg. Look at our potholes. They only fix that when there's the G20 guys are here, for example. Why don't do it all right through the year? Their accounts are in very deep trouble. The state-owned enterprises like Eskom, their accounts are in very, very deep trouble. And the reason for those things has to do with weak political leadership. So we need to fix that. And I believe we are on our way to fixing that as well. Next year, we're going to see local authority elections, looking at some by-elections. It's clear the ANC is losing big time, which is a good thing. So fix our politics, and I think we're slowly making progress on that front as well. Getting rid of the ANC, get proper policies in place, get hardworking, productive civil servants to support the economy, and then we can start talking about stronger economic growth.
And the idea that there's worse options in the ANC, it's hard to see how much worse it could be.
You know, let's be honest. There was a time when I was very scared of democracy. I was saying, listen, but this, I'm scared of democracy. This thing's not going to work out well. And I've learned a very important lesson is that you can trust democracy. You can trust the people of South Africa. They might make a mistake to vote for a political party that's doing horrible things like the ANC the last couple of years. But eventually we will come around and start voting for somebody else. So we might vote for wrong political parties, for wrong political leaders, but eventually we will learn our lessons and we'll start voting for somebody else. So bring it on. Let's use democracy to fix the problems.
The one thing that I've realized since, as we've grown this State of the Nation channel and spoken to a lot of politicians is that politicians are 100% reactive. To expect proactivity from a politician doesn't exist. Those politicians are permanently looking at the mood of the people. And responding to the mood of the people. And in many cases, to me, the thing that's fascinated me the most on the financial side has been the difference in the performance of the Minister of Finance, not because of him so much, but because at the beginning of the year when he was doing the budget, he would not look at the mood of the people.
No.
Now he realized, oh, hell, the people actually are not going to agree with me on this 2% VAT increase. So therefore, eventually he was brought to heel, and now he's a different person.
I can tell you, this debacle around VAT at the beginning of the year, I think was one of the best things that could have happened to South Africa, because it used to be a rubber stamp exercise. There's the budget, approve it, and it goes through. This time it was not accepted by the other political parties, and now everybody's an expert on VAT. Actually, an increase in VAT would have been a good thing, provided we reduce some other more harmful taxes, like income taxes. But the point is that suddenly people realize there's something called a budget. It is important, and I can influence the budget. That's a good thing. Let's make it a bright-faced topic.
The other important thing, of course, is for the government to see where their actual threat sits. Because there was this feeling that the threat sat with these other sort of more radical parties that have no economic policies whatsoever, as opposed to free market threat. Right? Well, you know what I mean? They really didn't quite understand that when they put things through like Expropriation Act, black South Africans saw this as just a continuation of what happened under apartheid when blacks weren't allowed to own property. Now you've got ANC government saying you're not allowed to own property. Right, and they did not like it at all. They dropped 5% in the polls immediately on passing. So it's interesting that maybe the ANC understands where the real threat sits. It doesn't sit in MK or EFF, because the world doesn't work that way.
No, I think like I've said, I keep on repeating myself, and that is that I think we've made a lot of progress in things like, for example, inflation targets, slow progress on the fiscal front as well. But the major important thing is that on a political front, there are some major changes happening as well.
And Dawie, this absolute war that the government has had on small business and on startup business, on competition, the war that the government
and
has.
Look at the most recent one, this license
nonsense.
Well, I did say one of the requirements is for free trade. Now, I mean, imagine if you just keep on throwing sand in the wheels of the machine, and this is exactly what this new requirement is going to have, the impact that it's going to have on the economy. Imagine the opportunities for corruption here, where each and every business needs a license
from a local authority that's dysfunctional already.
And those guys are out for one thing, and that is to line their own pockets. Yeah. So this is an example of that. Do not allow that. Let's talk about this like what you are doing exactly on this channel, and let's make people aware of the danger of this.
Yeah, perhaps people are hearing this for the first time, because we always got to presume that there's a lot of people that watch this, and a lot of people, there's so much noise, and it gets hidden behind Madlanga Commission or this problem or that problem. Let's explain to people exactly what the proposal is.
The proposal basically is that before you're allowed to trade, remember the requirement, free trade, but before you are allowed to trade, you must have a piece of paper, and it must be approved by some ineptocrat somewhere that's never worked in his life. Yeah. But he's got power, and he's got a pen, and he's got a stamp. So you need to go somewhere to a local authority guy, and he needs to give you a paper. Now imagine what's going to happen here.
Well, there's proof of this, because this is what absolutely murdered, decimated, and kept India as one of the poorest countries in the world. Yeah. They had their permit system, right, which was famous. You couldn't do anything without that
license, right?
Without some guy walking in there saying, "Okay, I like this shop. Bang, here's your permit." And if he didn't give it to you, you couldn't trade. And of course, it opens up for a whole lot of problems. Like, I've got the stamp. Before I put the stamp down,
just give me something.
Just give me something.
A cool drink, maybe.
Yeah. So this is a very old
madness.
It's an old trick.
Yeah.
Especially in the hands of local government, because it's so much more difficult to report 1 million cases of a little bit of bribery compared to state capture.
There's something else that we need to be concerned about as well, and that is how aggressive SARS has become. And that is also undermining economic activity, because SARS, you can't turn your back. You can't concentrate on your business, and then SARS is going to be all over you like a rash. And SARS has become seriously aggressive. And I know so many businesses that say, listen, I can't take this anymore. I'm going to close shop or whatever. I'm going to go somewhere else, because these guys are getting unreasonable. And the reason why they are getting unreasonable is because of the pressure of politicians on SARS. Politicians just can't keep on increasing taxes anymore, like what we saw, this debacle on VAT. So the alternative is just to put more pressure on SARS to get more money out of the system. And the more money SARS takes out of the system, the more money goes from the private productive sector to the unproductive part, of mostly unproductive part, called the state, and that money is, of course, misused in a system. And SARS getting far too aggressive, and we need to address that. And the only really sustainable way to addressing that is to reduce state expenditure, to remove the pressure on SARS to getting all this money out of the economy. Or put differently, actually what we need is stronger economic growth. And that will also provide more money to the Minister of Finance for his expenditure requirements.
Dawie, why does the South African economy, despite everything you've said, where and how does economic growth come into this economy of ours?
Let's just see where we started at the beginning of the year. I can remember budget number 1, the Minister of Finance predicted 1.9% economic growth. And every time budget number 2, that was reduced. And budget number 3, that was reduced. And the Reserve Bank also started with not strong economic growth, 1.6, I think, at the beginning of the year. The IMF and the World Bank, private sector economists. And as the year progresses, economic growth expectations were reduced. And now recently, in the last 2 or 3 months or so, what we've seen is that expectations or predictions for economic growth, and this year and next year gradually start being increased a little bit, including my own. And it is because of things like, for example, inflation reduction and inflation targets, a tax collection overrun as well because of the very aggressive SARS. Those are positive signs. But what really concerns me is that we're talking about possible economic growth this year, probably around about 1%, or maybe with a bit of luck, just over 1%. And everybody says, wow, the economy is growing. We just saw the third quarter economic growth numbers coming at 0.5%. And everybody says at least the economy has been growing for 3 quarters in a row. That is not good news. Economic growth, we're talking about, less than 1%, and we're calling that good. That's not good news. That's horrible news. Good economic growth is 4 and 5 and 6%. That's good economic growth. So what can we do to fix this? And we've spoken about that already. It's politics mostly, but I think the pressure is on. And I think with a bit of luck and some changes and the right macroeconomic policies, we've laid a foundation in terms of lower inflation expectations. And like I said, some changes as far as the fiscal accounts are concerned. But there's major other dangers as well. The way that the relationship with the Americans, for example, that's not good. The Americans are very important to us. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, that's not the point. He's a powerful guy, and we need to fix our trade relations with the United States. But in the meantime, things at least seem not to deteriorate the rate at which they have the last couple of years.
Yeah, because what we really need is we need to sell stuff to other people. Like any business, we need clients for whatever it is we produce. The danger is you start producing less and less because you've got fewer and fewer people to sell it to. There's also that kind of pressure. And our relationship with China is almost a one-way street. We are the consumer of Chinese products. They do take some of our raw materials.
I had the opportunity to, I go mountain biking and I go through the rural areas quite a lot, and I've been in Africa, looking at how the poverty that I've seen in Africa and in South Africa, and subsistence farmers. And I can remember going through one of these local villages and looking at these subsistence farmers. They are really it's very difficult to be there. Thinking to myself, will it ever be possible for them to compete with the Chinese? And it's going to take a very long time. We've got a very, very long road ahead of us. And the government, they want to establish small-scale farmers. That's not the answer. And many other examples, the small business development, that's a destructive department. We need to close that department down. We must understand that if you want to be part of a modern economy, you must get people properly skilled. You must make sure that you create a real macroeconomic environment where corporates can thrive. You don't need to be big necessarily, but that's the reality of life today. You cannot compete with the Chinese thinking. A subsistence farmer cannot compete with a big commercial farmer. There is just absolutely no way you can do that. And you have to accept that, and you have to realize that if we want to build a China-like economy in South Africa, we completely need to change our approach. And it must start with skills development and making use of the most modern technology and the other things that we've spoken about.
Because it hasn't seemed to dawn on our politicians that farming, for example, which feels like the oldest trade, second oldest trade in the world, second oldest profession, is in fact a high-tech industry. Now, it's unbelievably high-tech.
Farming is not a primary industry. It's a service industry.
Yeah.
It's drone pilots, it's geneticists, it's artificial intelligence people, people with white overalls and clipboards that work in farming today. It's a factory run by robots. It is not subsistence farming stuff anymore. Our politicians, they think politicians that if you get somebody to wave a flag, you've created a job. You have not. You're keeping somebody busy, yes, but you haven't created a job. You're just keeping people busy. Fix our education, fix our skills development system. And unfortunately, that's going to take a very long time.
I was watching an interesting program on the documentary on the second biggest lettuce producer in the European Union is an operation in the Netherlands, where they've got almost no land, terrible weather, and they're the second biggest lettuce producer in Europe, and it's run by 3 people. And it's inside, it's under roof, and they've got revolving sort of beds that move mechanically, and it's solar powered and all of these kind of things. And it's sort of this, you would think it's a farm, but it looks like a factory.
It's not the land that matters. It's what you do with the land that matters.
Yeah. So we've got a long way to go. And then let's talk about the wonderful word that keeps on coming out of the mouths of our politician. That always should be frightening enough. And there's a lot of talk about beneficiation. In other words, taking a primary product and turning it into something. That we, instead of just mining some mineral out of the ground and putting it on a boat and going to a market, that we should be doing something with that stuff. Now, we had one of the better primary beneficiators, and that was turning our coal, making it into electricity, and turning our minerals and turning it into various alloys and aluminium and chrome and things like that in smelters. So you needed electricity and you needed those big factories, and these things are very power hungry, but we had South Africa, part of it built on a mountain of coal. It made sense, but now all of them are closing.
When politicians use words like, for example, food security and beneficiation, then I really get worried. Because, for one, let me just say something about food security. I don't care about food security. I really don't mind about food security. That's politicians think you have to produce your own food. I'm just using this as an example. You don't need to. In a world that everybody trades freely, you can buy food. It doesn't matter. You don't need to produce your own food. You simply produce something else and use that to buy food. The same goes for so-called beneficiation. Of course, we're all in favor of so-called beneficiation. The problem when politicians start using the word beneficiation, that also means that they're going to put the rules and laws and things in place that's going to force us to beneficiate, to add value to something before we export that. And that's the dangerous part. Not the beneficiation part, but politicians putting measures in place or encourage or tax measures or whatever the case might be in order to get the private sector to beneficiate. That's the wrong approach, because quite often what they do in the process of trying to get the private sector to add value to whatever, they do far more harm than the benefit of so-called beneficiation. If you really want to get the benefit of beneficiation, what you need to do is simply create a macroeconomic environment that's good for business and make sure things like, for example, good local authorities, water, electricity, skills development, health services, safe environment, that sort of stuff. And the private sector will use that, will look for the opportunities themselves.
Yeah.
And that will add value to whatever we export. Do not get politicians involved in business. That's why there are politicians, because they can't do business.
Yeah. If they were good at business, they would never have become politicians.
Exactly. Just create the environment and leave it to the private sector. That will happen.
And sometimes you've got to look at sort of in the last 100 years or so, if one looks at the motor vehicle industry, originally dominated by America. They produced a massive, the majority of the world's vehicles. Europe got in on the game. It then moved to Japan. Everyone said, you can never buy a Japanese car. Japan moved into that market and it diminished the market share of other people. South Korea, now we've got China.
And China's eating everybody's lunch.
China's, but the point is that it goes around in cycles. To say that we are going to do one thing, and you better be aware that there's competition. It's not just what we want.
So we've got this motor manufacturing industry in South Africa that is highly protected and subsidized by you and me, by the way, for many years now. And we still do not have a motor manufacturing industry that can do it all by themselves. They need this layer of protection. And now things are changing so quickly. Will we be able to compete on electricity or electric motor vehicle market? I'm not so sure. So there's an example where politicians wanted to beneficiate something, to protect a certain industry so we can export and add value, whatever. And the motor industry is that. So has this been successful? And I would say no, because they still cannot stand on their own feet. So there's an excellent example. And today there are many thousands of people depending on that.
Yeah.
So you can't just close it now. Of course, the best you can do is just to make sure that you fix the environment to make sure that they can actually stand on their own feet and start competing internationally.
Because one of the things South Africans don't understand is that our vehicle manufacturing industry comes at the cost of the price of vehicles in South Africa.
Compare the price
we pay about double the price of our vehicles, because that money is then used to subsidize vehicles that go overseas. So they get, so in other words, it's a vehicle purchaser in South Africa that's subsidizing a car overseas, because we're using the money You're paying twice as much for your car because that money, that other 50% of the price, is going towards keeping an inefficient vehicle business going so that we can sell cheap vehicles to other countries.
And there's so much that we can do. Obviously, one of our resources that we have is coal, cheap coal. And I would certainly go for more coal power stations. The technology is there today to generate electricity much cheaper. That's cheap. Go for it. Or much cleaner. So go for it. Put up more coal power stations, nuclear power stations. So that is that's a benefit that South Africa has, that we can produce cheap electricity, cheap energy. But look what's happened to Eskom. It has been destroyed because of them. Because of the ANC mostly, yes.
Yeah. But now, Dawie, this is not just a South African problem, because we've got the US doing a form of protectionism, and also that sort of thinking that they're going to get manufacture back to the US.
That is a wrong approach. And that's where I need to differ from Donald Trump completely. Because the composition of if you look at composition of economies today, they look completely different from 100 years ago. 100 years ago, it was primary stuff that you take on a farm, produce on a farm, or take out of the ground, whatever, mostly. And some stuff that you manufacture in the factories and so on, very little happening in the service industry. Today, most economic activity is happening in the service industry. It's not happening in... Donald Trump still thinks, and many of our politicians still think, that a factory today is a lot of people working with spanners and greasy hands and blue overalls. That's not a modern factory. Modern factory today is run by robots, run by AI experts, and white overalls and clipboards and things like that. So that's where he's completely wrong. The world today is a service-driven industry. And maybe you can just make a comment about this. And this is something I think we are at the beginning of a period of amazing abundance. Because you've basically got two inputs into an economy. You've got labor and you've got capital. Capital I define very, very broadly. Capital can be land, can be money, can be machinery or whatever. So you've got human labor combined with certain skills, of course, and capital. But what has been happening in recent years is, as you put in more and more capital into the system, then human labor became more and more productive. But there's a change happening in the nature of capital. And the nature of capital is being driven today by artificial intelligence. And gradually what is happening, capital is becoming more productive on itself. And eventually, in certain instances, you can have capital producing stuff without the input of labor. And the price of stuff is already coming down dramatically, and it's likely to continue to come down. And we're entering a period of amazing abundance. If you measure what the price is, I've just had a look, for example, at the Americans. They just had the turkey meals and
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so there's an index where you compare the typical Thanksgiving dinner over time, and the price of a Thanksgiving dinner, it collapsed. It is so cheap. Let me give you one example. 200 years ago, you need 1,000 lumens to be able to read. So 1,000 lumens need about 12 candles. So you need about 12 candles for 1 hour to get 1,000 lumens to read at night. 200 years ago, it will cost you 3 hours to work to buy 12 candles to read for 1 hour at night. Today, you can buy 1,000 lumens for the price of 0.00 seconds. Everything is going to become much cheaper and abundant, with the exception of certain skills. Certain skills like educators, like certain medical professions, like housemaids, like going to a hotel, going to a restaurant, services. Those services are becoming more expensive. But stuff, things that you can touch, most of those things are going to become much cheaper. And you must know, if you're working in an industry where you manufacture stuff or produce stuff, your things that you're selling are going to become cheaper and cheaper. And the only way that you can remain competitive is to make sure you've got the necessary skills and make sure you are on top of the most recent technology. If you don't do that, you will close down your business.
Yeah, and unlocking the value of those skills. I'm so taken by the fact that our potentially best pool of talent is being put into the wrong places. They're going into making corporates bigger or going into government dead-end jobs with big salaries that are, you can't turn that down, other than the risk of, the risk of being an entrepreneur, especially in South Africa, or a business person, is just so high that why wouldn't you accept that big paying job at a corporate just who has to just comply with some kind of bureaucratic tick box, or the state that's now paying above the odds. When we were growing up, state employees got the lowest salaries and corporates got the second lowest salaries, and business people made the most. Now it's inverted,
unfortunately.
And that is killing off our potential entrepreneurs, isn't it, Dawie? Because we need to unlock the mental, the talent, the entrepreneurial talent.
Well, you do that voluntary, or the market's going to force you to do that.
How does the market force you to do that?
If you simply run out of business, you're going to close down your business because you're not competitive enough. And the world today is not a country of various countries. It is a one single big place where you can work in the clouds. The world has become the world economy is basically based in the clouds today.
I want to just close off by asking you, in terms of talent in South Africa, in your opinion, do you think South Africa has the talent?
We certainly do have the talent. What we lack is the necessary skills. We need the skills development. Many people do. There are many good institutions where we get the necessary skills, but there's so much more that we can do to get the masses much better skilled in South Africa. And I'm afraid there we are not doing what we're supposed to be doing.
So if Dawie Roodt was made advisor to the Minister of Finance, somebody mentioned something that we don't have a ministry. No one's in charge of growth. Everyone's in charge of something else. There's nobody that oversees growth, right? If you had to say, who's responsible for growth? Well, the Minister of Finance, he's the bookkeeper. He's not responsible for growth.
No, he's not responsible for growth. He's simply supposed to he's the bookkeeper, that's all. It's not even a state that's responsible for growth. They're only responsible for keeping me and my stuff safe.
Yes.
That's their job.
And
do that, and we will do the rest.
And let's hope that we would finally get somebody that understands that in the state. It would help if they just got out of our way, because to me the most telling statistic is that ever since I think it was one of the first moves under President Zuma when he took into power was to create a Ministry of Small Business,
which is wrong.
And ever since he did that, the number of small businesses has absolutely declined.
That's not the right approach. Small business is but we can talk about that one day.
We can talk about that, because remember, when a politician gets a portfolio, they feel the need to do something, and invariably it's a bad idea. So what you have when you have a Ministry of Small Business is just more and more regulation, which just stops business more and more. Dawie Roodt, thank you so much for making sense of the economy. Go out there today. Keep one little business happy, and that's Pace Car Rental, not so small anymore. Use the code SONA, get a discount. That's always useful. Go out there and think carefully about your business, how it can be more productive and how you can sell more stuff to someone. Be world-class, South Africa. That's what we need. We can't just beneficiate if we're selling lousy products. We need good products. Go out there, create something. It's never been as easy to get the ideas and get your stuff out there. Dawie, thank you so much. To everybody that joined us today, please subscribe to the State of the Nation channel. We'll see you again soon.